if you look at India's economy, when the economy is doing well, when inflation is low, growth is relatively high, then there is no major reason for having demonetization. No particular reason why it should be done now and at this moment, such an emergency measure.
Given that the 500 rupee note is used by housewives, students, rediwalas, vegetable vendors, and a whole range of artisans, given that it was 48% of all currency,
Absolutely.
and no one really considered it a high denomination note, should it have been demonetized?
No. Short answer.
So it was a mistake to demonetize?
No, but it could be remonetized. You know what I'm saying is everything, what you have demonetized, you have, hopefully you have not demonetized it permanently, that you have 102,000. You would have to have some progressive increases in note circulation.
The Attorney General has told the Supreme Court today that district cooperative banks will not be given permission to deal in the old or the new currency. He's just said it to the Supreme Court today. Does that disappoint you?
No, what he said, he has the right to say so. He has to decide what has to be done, but he has to also take care of the issue that you raised, that if those district cooperative banks are not there, then what other kinds of banks are there, or what other kinds of providers of money are there to make cash available to the very poor in the unorganized sector. Vision of making India cashless is certainly practical in, say, 50 years time. So you have to take a time horizon where you can make India cashless, as it were. I mean, just as you have made India full of mobiles and full of, mobile phones, Aadhaar cards and PAN cards and whatever it is. I mean, but this vision cannot take place in the next 5 years or 6 years.
So if the motivation or the justification for demonetization is to make India cashless and digital, you're suggesting it's happening 50 years too soon.
No, but you just think about it. That digitization requires a certain process, and it's a process which has to be accessible to the literate person. I mean, so it can't, how do you do it right away? And similarly, apart from digitization, when making India cashless, when much of the transactions are small and most of the salaries are small, how do you make it cashless? Because people don't have credit cards all over the country. I mean, number of people who have credit cards, how many are there? So how do you make it cashless? How do you make a payment for groceries?
So you're saying this is an idea whose time hasn't come.
No, this is an idea whose time has come, but keep it as an idea.
On the assumption that whatever you have in the bank account is actually legitimate declared money, and if it's not, tax authorities know what's in bank accounts, I think people should be totally free to take out whatever they want from their bank account. The fact that we put restrictions simply means that there is a shortage of currency and they want to limit the extent to which it's distributed around different people.
So when government spokesmen, sometimes ministers, sometimes senior bureaucrats, claim that this is actually being done, these restrictions are actually being placed to somehow curb black money, that is, forgive my colloquialism, baloney.
I've not heard that particular explanation, but I wouldn't find that very convincing. I mean, let's be clear. When normalcy is returned, is it the intention that when you've got your money in the bank and the tax people know what there is in the banks, can you or can you not take it out in cash? The short answer should be yes, you should be able to.
And if you can't, it's only because there's a shortage of cash.
Probably true. I mean, if you wanted to narrow the scope of, so to speak, the disruptive strike, limiting the demonetization to 1,000 would have kept a lot of people out of the danger.
This is somewhere, again, the government should have thought carefully, and if it had, it would probably have decided not to demonetize the 500 for this reason.
Well, I don't know what they would have decided, and I don't know what the pros and cons are.
But they should have thought carefully about it.
To my mind, first of all, to my mind, you don't demonetize 86% of the currency unless you can demonstrate that you can very quickly replace the currency.
And that they can't, because
we find it difficult. So in retrospect, it would have been better to demonetize half of it, which is the 1,000, and leave the 500 untouched. In my view, too much of the discussion is focusing on black money, or rather that part of black wealth which is held in cash. Now,
Stock
whether
of
it's,
money.
Yeah, whether it's held, whether it's 5%, 15%, those are relatively low numbers. But see, the important thing is, what are people disgusted about? They're disgusted about a system where black money is being generated. You can't do your business without getting permissions, which you have to bribe people for. Unfair, overly connected people get a preference over you. They want to stop the generation of black money. That's very different from the stock of black money. So in my view, I believe, by the way, that any identification of the black economy phenomenon as a target is the correct identification. But the most important thing is the generation, the flow of black money.
That is not affected by these measures at all?
Not at all.
It is despotic in the sense that if a government promises a promissory note, when that was given, we will give you this amount of compensation. When you break that promise, he calls this a despotic action, this coming from somebody with the eminence of Dr. Amartya Sen.
So there is a clear provision for it. It's not, it's not as despotic would have meant actually that the government went against or outside of the constitution. That's not how it is. Also, by the way, I think a despotic action should create some uproar from the public to the opposition. The public sentiment has been quite the contrary, actually. It's best captured for me in a picture that has been doing rounds where this owner of a shop, Mr. Pamecha, who stands in front of his shop and says that, in response to the strike that was called for, or the Bharat Bandh that was called for on the 28th of November, so the caption on his shop, that sign on his shop says that, Kala dhan tumhara duba, हम दुकान क्यों बंद करें 28 को हमारी दुकान 2 घंटे ज़्यादा खुली रहेगी. So that is what really captures the mood of the public. So I really don't quite appreciate in what sense this was a despotic act. The way the economy is evolving, we had second quarter numbers which were of course all prior to the November 8th action, but the economy did do okay in the second quarter, 7.3%. And now as we are going forward, certainly we'll see some decline in this quarter, the third quarter that is. How much I shall not speculate, but
you have some calculation. The government has to have some estimate.
No. The point I'm making to you is that the activity is very rapidly coming back up, and so I think we'll see some decline in the third quarter in the growth rate. We'll see in the third quarter some bit of less than what will happen in the third quarter will happen also in the fourth quarter. But I think whatever losses that happen in this particular year in aggregate, I think we are going to recover in a big way as we go into the next year and the following year.
What I do want to point out is that in the process of demonetization, monumental mismanagement has been undertaken, about which today there is no two opinions in the country as a whole. Even those who say that this measure will do harm or will cause distress in the short run, but be in the interest of the country in the long run. Well, I am reminded of what John Keynes said once, in the long run all of us are dead. And therefore, it is important to take note of the grievances of the people, the ordinary people who have suffered as a result of this imposition on the country overnight by the Prime Minister. And I say so with all responsibility that the outcome, we do not know what will be the final outcome. Prime Minister has said that we should wait for 50 days. Well, 50 days is a short period, but for those who are poor and deprived sections of the community, even 50 days torture can bring about disastrous effects. And that's why about 60 to 65 people have lost their lives, maybe more. And what is more is, what has been done can weaken and erode our people's confidence in the currency system and in the banking system. One, I would like to know from the Prime Minister the names of any countries he may think of where people have deposited their money in the banks, but they are not allowed to withdraw their money. It is no good that every day the banking system comes with modification of the rules, the conditions under which people can withdraw money. That reflects very poorly on the Prime Minister's office, on the Finance Minister's office, and on the Reserve Bank of India.
255 million people now have bank accounts under the Pradhan Mantri Jan-Dhan Yojana. So the issue of financial inclusion is no longer what it used to be 3 years ago. Don't get me wrong. Several of these people have RuPay debit cards, but they have not been persuaded, they have not been motivated to realize that those debit cards can be used for transactions and not just for ATM withdrawal.
What is the impact on casual laborers who depend on day-to-day income to survive? If manual labor on construction sites, manual laborers on farms now find their employers can't pay them and they're not employed.
Are we talking about the transition period, or are we talking about beyond the transition period?
We're talking about
which one?
The transition period.
First, let's talk about the beyond the transition period.
Talk about the transition, then we'll go beyond.
Now, obviously, in the transition period, everyone is suffering an inconvenience. Now, if you are looking at the inconvenience, a large part of it was related to ATMs. Now, so far as the banks...
Well, no, forgive me. I don't think casual wage labor actually gets money from ATMs.
Who does casual labor get?
They get money in cash from their employers.
A, you need to have currency notes printed. B, you need to deliver the printed currency notes to banks. C, you need to deliver the currency notes to recalibrated ATMs. These are different steps in the process.
But I'll come to ATMs in a moment's time.
Now,
were enough notes printed and delivered to banks in time or not? That's the question.
You are mixing up two questions. Were enough currency notes printed? Were they delivered to banks? Well, these are two separate questions.
Let me then break them up to make it easier for you. First of all, enough currency notes weren't printed. By Sumitra Chaudhary's calculations, only 600 out of the 2,300 plus were ready. Only 600.
I'm not going to get provoked into Sumitra Chaudhary's calculations. By around the 15th of January. I'm sorry, by the 15th of November. I think this figure has been quoted by the Finance Minister also, Finance Ministry, 8 lakh crores of currency notes were printed.
If that black money in fact was there, it has been successfully laundered by a government that is incompetent or intentionally compliant. The people of the country will have to decide.
Now, Dr. Mitra, whether what's achieved is worth the pain depends entirely on how big that pain is. So let me ask you, what do you believe will be the hit to India's GDP as a result of demonetization?
Well, I've got a best case scenario with Q1. Now I come to the second option, but economists always look at alternatives, possible case scenario. And that again I've done a detailed estimate, and I find the growth rate may fall on the aggregate for this year to 4.3%. Will arrive at 4.3%, which means it will fall by 3.2%. So either 2% best case scenario or 3.2% as the possibility, which would mean a loss of 4.7 lakh crores of GDP extinguished. So you have a choice. You want to kill 3 lakh crores GDP, or you kill 4.7 lakh GDP. You take your pick. This is the biggest scandal of the world in terms of a growing economy, which has simply been extinguished in terms of its growth momentum.
What the government believes is, and there is an element of economic truth in it if it turns out to be correct. If out of, say, 14 or 15 lakh crore high denomination notes, or if all of them were legal tender, all of them were legitimate, believe me, all of them will go through the bank. The government hopes that some part will not come back to the bank. The part that does not come back to the bank is obviously illegitimately earned income, and that can be liquidated. That's the government.
So you believe that's only a fraction? You believe that's only the fraction, and you're saying, therefore, for the kind of pain which is being caused, the gain is very limited. That's your broad point.
There's more economics to it, which I'll have to explain. You see, I don't know how much will come back to the banking system. But at least Dr. Raghuram Rajan, in a speech and answering questions, said, listen, most of it will come back, because there are many ways in which it can be brought back into the banking system. But to the extent that money does not come back to the bank, the RBI will extinguish that liability. But money is created by the RBI to meet the demand. Currency is printed to meet the demand for currency. People need currency to transact their business. Therefore, if the money in circulation is insufficient to sustain economic activity, RBI will print more currency. So ultimately, after all this exercise, you find, say, after 6 months or 8 months or 9 months, we have got the new 2,000 rupee note, the new 500 rupee note, and perhaps the new 1,000 rupee note, altogether adding up to 15 or 16 lakh crore. This exercise is an exercise in futility.
Is it true that you also consider demonetization?
And we rejected it, and what did we do instead? Raghuram Rajan and I, what did we do instead? In January 2014, we announced all pre-2005 notes will be phased out. New series will replace it. You please go and exchange your old series. After March 31, the old series will not be legal tender. That is the way, and then to the extent that old series does not come back to the bank, it is impounded and liquidated.
So that's what you would have done?
That is what we did, not would have done.
And in this situation also you would have done?
And who opposed it? Meenakshi Lekhi, spokesperson of BJP, went on air and called it an anti-poor move. If that was anti-poor, what is this?
Are you saying, therefore, if Raghuram Rajan was still RBI governor, he would have not accepted this?
Undoubtedly.
You're saying you're confident. This is not speculation.
No,
this is based on your own experience of January 2014.
I know his views. I mean, he has not spoken.
Yes.
And maybe he will not speak, because he's far away now.
Yes.
But I know from my experience, he would not have agreed to demonetization.